just continuing with what we started yesterday. Yesterday we showed how by taking a JPanel and actually removing the layout manager, which is responsible for putting the widgets there, and directly drawing on it. So we did that with code yesterday, but what we're going to do today is we're going to actually show how to draw a couple of simple shapes with the mouse. And if you've been pretty much duplicating just a simple drawing program that you're used to, the idea isn't to produce a drawing program that's more wonderful than anything that you have. In fact, we're not even going to come close to all the features that you would come to expect for that. What we're doing here is we're peeling back the hood and visiting the sausage factory that does all this, at least in a Java flavor. This isn't the only way to do it. Drawing programs like this have been around since forever, and they're implemented in all kinds of different approaches. The one we're doing is an object-oriented approach, and I feel that particularly for something like this, an object-oriented approach is a very useful one. And in the process, what I hope that you're also getting is a sense of why Java has these things called interfaces, why this inheritance business works so effectively, or at least can work effectively, and what abstract classes are kind of about when we're working with interfaces and implementing parts of the interface with an abstract class, diving all the way down to a concrete class. So the example for that was, I still have it, where is it? Can't seem to find, oh, okay. So we had the class hierarchy for the rectangle shape, or the shape to the rectangle shape, which was abstract, to rectangle 2D, which was also abstract, to rectangle 2D double, which was the concrete one. And there's also a corresponding one called ellipse 2D, which we will deal with today. So, so first we're going to try to draw a shape with the mouse, and we'll show how using the mouse events that get fired whenever we manipulate the mouse on the screen get used to figure out what's going on with that. And then we want to display multiple shapes on the canvas. And then, since we're going to have two types of shapes that we have, rectangles and ellipses, we're going to have add a radio button to choose the next shape, to say, okay, when I'm drawing another one, is it going to be a rectangle or an ellipse? And then finally, there's kind of a nice little component that Swing has called a color chooser, which is something that you've probably encountered in other applications. And then finally, just can we clear the canvas in just one button? So that's what's on tap for today. Again, I think I need to share the entire screen. There we are with that, but we want NetBeans here. If you remember from yesterday, we had a class, I called it MyFrame, which did a lot of the thing, sorry, not the base frame, not MyFrame, base frame, which was inspired by that MyFrame that we had, and simply extracted some of the common things that I would want to have, so that I didn't have to kind of keep writing this window closer again and again. Another option to this, by the way, would be to have just pull this out to have its own class and its own file, and then have that be publicly available so that anybody who wanted it could simply go grab it. Instead, the choice was to write this base class called base frame. And it, it sets us up. We can always override the size and location. We can actually override the default close operation if we ever want to. But again, the idea of that was to always check with the user if they're trying to close the thing. And also we're calling this init, which sets all this up. And so that init can be overridden, which we did with this class, which I think yesterday I had a bad name for it. I think I called it mouse listener. The problem is that the mouse listener is something that we are going to, that's actually an interface as well. So that was colliding with that. So if you haven't already, if you do a pull on the class code, then it will bring down the new and all I did was just change the name. That's to mouse drawing, which is what it should have been named in the first place. And the idea here is that all the drawing is going to be done on a J panel, which is defined as an inner class. And in that, it sets the layout to null. And what that means, when we do that, that means that we're going to be directly interacting with the mouse on it. In other words, we're not going to be, once we set the layout to null, we can't do things like put buttons or any other widgets in it, because when we do that, that's what the layout manager does. Also, by default, a J panel is transparent and has no color. So I explicitly set the background color to white and the opaqueness to true. Again, that's something that could in principle be added as an option. Here it's just hard coded in. And then here's where all the action is. So this drawn shape was listed as an instance variable, and the color was also listed as an instance variable. And so that had access to this method in the inner class. Paint component, notice it's overridden. So paint component is something that JPanel has. It's actually something that goes all the way back to component and higher. I'm not sure exactly how far up it goes, but what paint component does is it gets past what's called a graphics context, which is an object of type graphics. And actually following swing, the actual instance is a graphics 2D. And we almost always want to cast that graphics argument to a graphics 2D, because graphics 2D has some extra methods that we can use. And the graphics that we get is always going to be a graphics 2D object that comes from the graphics thread that the Java virtual machine produces. And the reason for that is because the graphics 2D class has the ability to set the color, and most importantly, to just take a shape and draw that shape. In this case, we defined it to simply be a shape. I think unfortunately, shape doesn't have some of the methods that we ultimately want. And so actually one of the first things I'm going to do is change this to a rectangular shape, which is also an abstract class, but that's a superclass of both the ellipse and the rectangle that we're going to have here. And then let's see, somewhere this is not going to, okay, yeah. So notice that there's no red squiggly. I was possibly anticipating that. However, notice that because rectangle 2D and also ellipse 2D, which we also seem to have mentioned yesterday, those are both subclasses of the abstract rectangular shape. And so now here we're hard coding in a single, in this case, it's going to be a single ellipse, and we're going to draw it in red. And so when we run it, we see that there is our ellipse. Since we gave it the same height and width, it draws as a circle. If we were to change that, say to make it a little more oblong, then it would come up a little squished. Okay, so all right, so this is all just to demonstrate how to do it. And so a couple things, let's see, we want to make sure. Okay, yeah, so because this is an instance variable and we're going to be manipulating it, we may or may not, it may or may not be null. So what we're going to do is I'm going to, let's keep the drawn color to be red. But now, see, now I've commented this out and I want to make sure that I don't get a runtime exception when I run it. And so I have nothing. That's what I wanted. So our first task is to be able to draw one. So let's see what is involved with that. We are going to listen to the mouse. And typically when you draw one of these things, what you do is you press on the mouse and then you drag it. So that's going to involve both a mouse listener and a mouse motion listener. So we're going to implement both mouse listener and mouse motion listener. For some reason, I keep hitting S instead of E. Okay, as we've seen, this mouse tracker that we had, that implemented the mouse motion listener, which had two methods, mouse dragged and mouse moved. We'll see what methods these guys have when we implement all of our abstract methods. And so we see that the mouse listener has a method mouse clicked. You know what a click is, mouse pressed. Now, when we press, that's when we click and hold. Mouse release, that's when we let go. And then mouse entered and mouse exited, those are events which happen when we go in or out of the object that we're listening to. You've kind of, if you've been on some web pages lately in the past few years, you've noticed that there have been situations where when you move your mouse into a certain area, then stuff starts happening. That's where these exit and enter events kind of happen. And then mouse moved. Again, we're not going to deal with anything like that. Mouse entered, we're not going to. Okay, we're going to actually deal with mouse dragged. So let me bring that up. And mouse dragged and mouse released. So, and then mouse clicked. Again, we're gonna deal with that at some point, but okay, these are the three. And then what do you, unused element. We haven't used it yet. Okay, so to draw something, and we'll just draw a rectangle for now. So when we press the mouse down, that's where we are signaling that we are beginning to do the draw. So what is it that we basically need here? What we need is we need to mark where we press the mouse, and that's going to be represented by something called a point 2D. So I'll call it mouse down. And so, and I'll do this in the next. Okay, so a mouse down, again, I make it as an instance variable because I want things like the mouse dragged and mouse released methods to have access to it. Again, remember early on we talked about what the scope and who can see what. So if I, and the choices, there are really only 3 types. From the inside out, we have local variables, which include arguments. We have instance variables, and then we have static variables or class variables. So between an instance variable and a local variable, it has to do with who can see it, the scope. So if I defined, I want to remember where the mouse was pressed. All right, so now every time I drag the mouse, as we've seen in our mouse tracker, so when the mouse was dragged or the mouse was moved, we saw that this get point said where it was. So we can, every time the mouse is dragged, what we can do is, okay, what I'm going to do is, okay, first let's just get where we are. And then what I want to do is I want to set the drawn shape to be a new, okay, and you got to be little bit careful here. Now NetBeans is really very clippy like here because NetBeans is not being helpful. Okay, so I want to, okay, I have where I put the mouse down and I have where the mouse is here. And so the X and the Y are going to be where there are a couple ways of doing this, so I'll do it the most straightforward way. So the location of this is going to be where we put the mouse down. So it would be mouse down, get X. So the first argument is the X. The second argument is the Y. Okay, so that's where it is. The second 2 arguments are the width and the height. So now the width is going to be where we are here. Get X minus the X coordinate of where we put the mouse down, and the Y, the height, is going to be the Y minus where we put the mouse down, the Y. And there are cleverer ways to do that, but we're not going to do that. Okay, so and then what we need to do is we need to make sure that that panel gets repainted. And so there's a method called repaint. And so what that does is say, okay, after we've done this, we've set the drawn shape to be this new rectangle. And then when it gets repainted, what's going to happen is eventually this paint component is going to get called and it's going to draw the shape at the new location. So that's what we're looking for. So, and now this is not going to work because what I need to do, and I'm sure you all were thinking that, is I need to make sure that the I need to instantiate it. And then I need to add it as a mouse listener and a mouse motion listener. I need to add both. I need to add the right one. Okay. So the mouse listener only listens for the clicks. The mouse motion listener is what's listening for, in this case, the dragging. Okay, so I need, in this case, the mouse pressed, the mouse dragged. And so what, hopefully, let's see if this much should work. So if I, see, notice what I'm dragging the mouse, and then when I let go, it's there. Now, can you guess what's going to happen if I do it again? If I do it again, what happens is, because I only have one of these guys, then the previous one just gets erased. Okay, but so that checks the first box, okay, which was that instead of hard coding in what the shape is, I now can create one shape, one specific shape at different locations, and then it stays there until I do that again. And then notice that I'm still this mouse tracker thing. In fact, notice that when I'm dragging it, that this guy here still is doing that. So what does that tell you? That tells you that when the mouse events occur, they get dispatched to all of the listeners. So I have two mouse motion listeners, one for this guy right here, who's listening to both moving the mouse and dragging the mouse. And then I have a second one with this mouse draw listener that in this case is only listening for the mouse dragged. It hears the mouse moved events as well, but is not doing anything with it because I don't have to.
Professor Buss, can you drag into the negative range, or will that return negative value so it won't draw a rectangle? Like
Yeah,
you go like left and up.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'd have to do like an absolute value in there to be able to draw it the other way.
Yes.
Oops. Okay.
So I noticed that I hadn't. Yeah, that's a good point. If you want to do that, I'll leave that as an exercise. But you're absolutely right. Yes, I just need to put absolute values here. Okay, so the next thing. Okay, so now we can draw one thing, and now let's say I want to be able to choose whether I'm drawing a rectangle or an ellipse, and one way to do that is by some radio buttons. So let's put some radio buttons on here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a couple of other things in there. And remember our Russian nested dolls here. So the J panel is kind of the workhorse for this. So I'm going to put a panel in the north for this, and it's going to have some stuff. And the first thing it's going to have a little area that has some radio buttons. So I'm going to create another J panel. And just another regular old J panel, as we've done. I'll add that. Okay, so now I need some radio buttons to put in there. Again, with radio buttons, I have a button group. Okay, what am I doing here? Okay, well, why am I doing this? I'm going to create radio buttons so that I can select either an ellipse or a rectangle that I'm drawing. Okay, so the rect button. And in the process, we'll also, I'll call it rectangle. Oops, rectangle. Okay, the names are going to be important. And then, again, I need to add it to the button group, which is non-visual. And then I need to add it to the radio buttons panel so that you can see it. Again, remember, the button group is what causes you to say, okay, when I click this radio button, then all the other radio buttons in the group will be shut off. So that, but this is not visual. So to see it, I need to put it into a J panel. So, and okay, and these names are going to be important. So the ellipse button, and then I need to add it to the, and then here's, okay, so let's see what that looks like. Just, okay, so here they are. And again, so the radio button part is working. Now, one thing is that I want to make sure that one of them is selected at first. You notice that when I started it, nobody was selected. So I can do that by, well, one way is I can actually programmatically, and I want to do that by invoking a method called doClick. So all of the button type widgets have a method called doClick. And what that is I've programmatically clicked it. So this is going to act just as if somebody had clicked it. Okay, so now what do I want that to do? Oh, there's one more thing I want to do to the radio buttons group, and that is I want to set the border just to set it off. Oh, you can go crazy with these borders. The etched border is kind of one that I found to be useful. So when you run that, what's going to happen is there's going to be there's a little box around it so that I can see that. And the reason for that is I'm going to put some other buttons in the top that are going to do other things. Notice now that the rectangle is selected, and that's because I did this doClick thing. So now what do I want to use this for? Well, what I want to use it for is, notice I create, the drawn shape is going to be a rectangular shape. And if the rectangle button is selected, then I want to draw a rectangle. If the ellipse button is selected, I'm going to draw an ellipse. Okay, right now it doesn't do that. Because why? Because I've hard-coded in I've hard-coded in what it is. So I need to have an instance variable that tells me whether what it is. There are a number of different ways of doing it. I'm going to do just a simple but slightly fragile way. I'll call it shape type. And how are we going to set that? Okay, I'm going to put this down here because I just want it out of the way. Okay, so okay, so how do we respond to things like buttons? We've been using action listeners, and so I'm going to have an action listener that's going to set the shape selection.
Arnie, I had a question on your methodology here.
Sure.
Couldn't you have written a method for that as well? Is there like something that's going to indicate whether you're writing a method or creating an inner class?
Yes, I could have written a method for it. That's largely a matter of taste.
Okay.
The reason I prefer these inner classes is that it gives me more, actually gives me more flexibility. But yes, I could have done this all. Well, here's the thing. If I could have made my class implement an action listener and have it listen for everything. The reason why I don't do that is, and that would work, but the reason why I don't do that is because then I would have to, every time I heard an action event, I'd have to figure out, okay, who clicked me and what are you doing? So here, in other words, here we're doing the radio buttons. That's one thing. When I'm finished with this, we're going to have another button, which is going to allow you to select the color. So that would fire an action event. So if I had just one action performed method, I would have to figure out, okay, did he click the radio button that said the shape, or did he click this other button that's going to select the color? Again, not a big deal, but as you have more and more of these, if you have a larger application with lots of menus and buttons and other widgets, then I believe it's a more fine-grained design to have a lot of atomic listeners, like this listener that I'm creating right here is it's just a small little thing, but it's going to be listening just to those radio buttons. And I can very simply now set the shape type to be the action command of the radio button that was selected. See, so the one says rectangle, one says ellipse. And so now what I can do is I will, was it shape selection? Did I answer your question in there? Again, it's you're absolutely right. You could do it with just methods instead of these inner classes.
No, I appreciate it. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so these rectangle. So the rectangle button, I'm going to add as an action listener to the shape selection, and I'm also going to for the ellipse one, action listener to the shape selection. And then just to kind of make sure that we're, where did I put it? There we are. Let's just sort of set it to do that. Okay. Just to show, so let's test that out to see whether or not. Okay, so if you look down, oops, see, it gets overwritten by, so we see that whenever I click on this, at least it knows what it's drawing. All right, so now Okay, so where is that going to come into play? That's going to come into play over here where I decide what my drawn shape is going to be. So couple of choices on this. Probably I'll do a switch on the shape type just to kind of show that, because again, format that to get you down there. And I want to format that. Okay, so if it's a rectangle, I'm going to create a rectangle. If it's an ellipse, I'm going to do the same thing, except with an ellipse. With the same thing. I'm going to be lazy here. And oops. And then with switch statements, you always want to have a default. And if I were doing this as an application, I would have a logger going on. I don't want to do that. I'll just do a system error print line, which is actually kind of okay, because it's okay to do to print error statements to the error output. It's not system out, it's system error. And this should never happen. However, and for a small program like this, it isn't going to happen. However, in larger programs, and I don't know what your experience has been or will be, but there have been a number of different times when I've written logic and there are only a certain set of conditions, and then there's a condition that shouldn't happen. But again, you want to account for that. Murphy's law says that it happens. So, and you may have seen, if you've read code, this should never happen. And Murphy's law says if something doesn't happen, then it actually does happen. So, all right. So now, okay, what we're after here is, okay, there's our rectangle. But if I choose an ellipse, now I'm drawing an ellipse. Okay. And if there were other possibilities, which one could have. So if I selected square, then that would be a constraint on what the height and width would have to be the same. And likewise, if I said circle instead of ellipse, and those could be other choices. And as those choices, now right now, since with only 2 choices, radio button is a reasonable widget for that. If I had many, many different choices, then something like a combo box would be a better choice for that. Okay. So now there's this other piece. Okay, now what I'm going to do, just in this, okay, now I have a set of features. I'm implementing those features. I've reached a point where I've implemented at least some of them. And then what I want to do is I want to actually commit what I have, because I'm not going to push it yet. But what have I done? I have, I now have the choice of shape. Okay, I've implemented that. So I want to just sort of save that. So typically what you want to do is you want to commit once you've reached a certain milestone, so you can always kind of go back to it. Now, if I kind of screw up on something, I can go back to it. All right, so the next thing that I want to do, and this is what I'm gonna have to finish with today, is, okay, we're stuck with the color red here, but what if we want to do something different? All right, so, and that different is, I'm gonna have a, let's see, should, oops. I don't know if that's the best name, but all right, so I'm going to add a button which is going to allow me to choose the color that I want from all the possible colors that I could have. So and it's going to be the outline color. There are actually two colors that I can, actually there are lots of different colors I can have with these shapes. I can have, there's the outline, there's the fill, and there's the width of the outline. There's the gradient of the, I mean, there are all kinds of fancy things you can do, which we were not going to have time for this, but now what am I going to call this? I'll say, you know, I'll call it color. And okay, let's add it to that. Okay, and the reason I'm hesitating right now is because, let's see where we're here. Actually, I'm going to comment all that out. I want my, I'm going to set the default to black just to start, and we'll see how we can change that to something else. Where the reason I'm hesitating here is because, see, now I have a choice, and this gets back to the scope of instance variables. So this is a local variable, which means that I need to be a little bit careful about how I deal with it. But again, okay, so what I'm going to do is, again, when the user clicks on it, here's what I want to do. I want to, this is, okay, so what this is there's something called a J color chooser, and that's going to let me select a color. And when I do that, when I show that dialog, I'm going to have to, I can either select a color or I can cancel it. And if I cancel it, then basically it just reverts to whatever the selection was. But if I don't, then it's going to change to the new one. And once I do that, okay, so let's see what that's going to be about. So again, I'm going to create the action listener. and I'm going to add it to the color choice button. Add, oops, action listener. And then, okay, so let's see what that does. Okay, first of all, okay, now our default color is black. So let's see what happens when we select the color. This is the color choice, the color chooser. And we have our choice. We can either sort of select it from this little set of these guys, or we can kind of do it from this, or there's this pattern, there's the RGB pattern, there's the cyan, magenta, yellow pattern. We can even set alphas and whatever. You know, the easy zippy thing is just with the swatches. And if we set that, what I'm looking for is now it gets drawn with whatever color we're selecting. Okay. Now what I wanted to, what I want to do is I want to now have this little color button indicate somewhat what color I'm drawing. And I have two choices. I can make the background of it, or I can do the text. And I think the text is a little more, now we haven't dealt with images and we're not going to deal with images. But here, remember before I said I was hesitating about whether to have this J button to be an instance variable, which would mean that everybody would have, all the methods would have access to it, or to leave it as a local variable. I left it as a local variable. And now, okay, what I want to do is I want to change the color of the text in the button to reflect the color that was chosen. Now, you might think, okay, well, since this is a local variable in a different method, I can't directly access it. However, there is the source. And what I can do is, again, just as sort of a check, if that's an instance of, and I think all it needs to be is an abstract button. Remember, abstract button is the instance of an abstract button. Then, come on. Okay, then I can safely cast it to an abstract button, and it has a method called set foreground. And I'm going to set the foreground to the drawn color. Okay, so I had two choices here. Okay, one was I could have avoided all this stuff by simply making this button an instance variable, which meant that I would have direct access to it. But I wanted to show you that this allows this action event to say, okay, who clicked me? And as I said before, when I was answering the question about, well, why not just do, you know, forget about these inner classes, just do everything with the method. And I could, if I'm listening for action performed events, I could be listening in one place for all of them, but then I need to figure out who did what to whom. And this is how I would do that. I would have to get the source and say, okay, who are you? What are you doing? But again, bottom line here is, okay, default is black. Let's change the color to something else. And then you see the color of the button now is whatever I've selected. And that's true whether I'm drawing ellipses or others. And if I change it to something else, then you see again the text of the button is changed to whatever color that I'm doing. Okay, so now the last piece of this, which I will do tomorrow, is, well, okay, it's not terribly interesting to have just one shape. How can I handle a bunch of shapes? And that we will do tomorrow, and that will kind of conclude this foray into dealing with the mouse events.